Happy Sunday, y'all. Happy Sunday. Happy Sunday. This is what, 2 times in as many days? What, 4 or 5 days since I last saw you? And then you might be wondering if you're new. Well, who are you? Well, I am Krishan Wright. I'm the founder of Blaxit Global and the host of the Blaxit Global podcast. Blaxit Global exists to empower and inspire members of the African diaspora to pursue a life abroad. So if you're Black and you want to move abroad, no matter where you are in the globe or where you want to go in the globe, this is the spot. So do yourself a favor, like the video, subscribe to the channel so you can get updates when I go live like this. So this is not my regular time. I'm now committing to Thursdays at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, but I am joining you from Lisbon, Portugal, where I moved 6 weeks ago today, y'all. Vicky G, good morning from New Jersey. How's it doing in New Jersey? It's been a minute since I was in Jersey. Yes, Terry's here. Hey, Terry, thank you for joining from Connecticut. And Catherine, hey, good morning from Philly. And I know it's early for y'all, but with good reason, because we have a special guest that's joining us from a far distant land. Winnie, hey Winnie, good morning from Houston. Oh my gosh, y'all got up early. I appreciate it. So y'all know when I start these lives, I always got something to talk about. Last night, oh my goodness, last night was our freedom party. And we had 16 of us all together. I'll be sharing some things on my Instagram, and for the Blaxit Global YouTube channel members, you'll get some more exclusive behind the scenes footage. But last night, 16 of us got together in Setúbal, Portugal, and I hosted a private dinner, our freedom party. So it was our way to connect and reflect on our respective journeys. And so in Blaxit Global Passport, where we have accountability groups that I lead, we have a men's group for the men in the group, we have a lot of workshops, a lot of resources. So if you want to move abroad, this is where you go. And while I say this, let me drop the link for those of you who are like, what's Blaxit Global Passport? It's our private community. It is not on Facebook. And it is for you to get what you need to get from where you are to where you want to be. So we had a Portugal accountability group, which we still have. But most of the members of the group actually made the journey to Portugal this year. And so it was 11 of us in total, including our families. And so it was our time to get together. We also had some former guests that were on the show that came out to support, like Natalie, who's in season 5, Rick and Halisi, our Black Utopia, came out. We had Joan, who lives in Setúbal, another gentleman, Tony, who just moved here last month. And we had it at Rum and Tickles, which if you are on Instagram, I highly recommend that you follow. But then when you come to Portugal, you have to get a ticket to a Rum and Tickles dinner. Kelvin pulled out all the stops. There was some rum and everything. But we ate, we drank. We had our friends, Tadasi and Mel, last night. It was just such a great time. June and Penny, it was amazing. So I'm so excited that we were able to be together in fellowship and in celebration of our freedom. And speaking of our friends, our Black Utopia, hey, boa tarde. Couple hours since I left you. Speaking of our friends, our Black Utopia, we are hosting a summit. If you just are hearing this for the first time, there's still time. We are hosting the Move to Portugal Virtual Summit. Virtual, it's online. You don't even have to leave your house, right? All you need is an internet connection. But we are making it accessible for you to find out everything you need to know about moving to Portugal. Nothing about, hey, I saw this on Instagram, or I read this online, or I heard this from one other person, or I thought I heard. No, this is your one-stop shop. We will have immigration attorney, SGP Associates. We have a business attorney, Lighthouse Consulting, who are also sponsors, Sarah Chico Pinto, who we've seen on this channel, as well as Lighthouse Consulting, and Serenity Care, which will talk about healthcare. We'll have Border, who, for any of you who know about opening a bank account in Portugal and all of that, they will be there. We'll have information on pet relocation. We'll have Portugal the Place, who helped me get this beautiful place that I now call home, talking about the real estate market. We have speakers talking about a variety of experiences that they've had here in Portugal. And then also you'll hear from Black expats who live in different parts of the country tell about what it is like living in Portugal. So if you've had questions about whether or not it's for you, or you're serious, but you want to know, hey, I hear about these changes in the NHR, and I want to know if I need this for my bank account, you're going to hear it from the experts. So based on whatever ticket level you get, you will have access to some additional time with our speakers. But this is where you get to the answer faster, right? If you had to pay a tax professional, which we will have at the summit, one talking about the US side and the other talking about the Portugal side, it is your opportunity to make an investment in you, because if you had to spend money to talk to these people individually, it would be more than the cost of the ticket. So definitely take the opportunity to invest in yourself, invest in your freedom, and get a ticket to the Move to Portugal Virtual Summit, which I will drop a link to it now for y'all. And Alicia said there was so much more. Yes, yes. So you can be like us. You can be, we're ready to celebrate the next class of freedom seekers that are enjoying now their best lives in Portugal. So one of the things that I want to, before I segue back into talking, I want to say hi. Yes, we said hi to Winnie. Hey, Michelle. Maureen. Hey, I gotta write you back. Maureen and St. Martin. Yes, 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 yes. Hey, Regina. All right. Oh my goodness. Y'all got up early for this. I love it. But one of the things that I love most about living in Portugal, which is one of the safest countries in the world, sadly, I can't say that about the country that I was born in, which is the US, is the fact that I am able to move about freely. I don't have the same level of anxiety that I had. I don't have to worry about gun violence and things like that. But one of the things that I've realized about the time that I've been here is less anxiety for sure. And I think it is because there's a level of psychological safety that I'm afforded here that I didn't have in the US, which was why I thought this was a great topic to talk about for all of us. And with that, I said, who would be the best person to bring on to this subject? So, who we have joining me now from Japan is Dr. Londi, an international psychologist who's living in Japan. Hey!
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for taking the time. I know it's late for you. It's after 9 for you. It's afternoon for me, and early for our friends on the East Coast, and even earlier if there's any folks that are joining from the West Coast. But and also for the audience, if you have any questions, feel free to ask and put a Q before your question if you would do so. But what I wanted to do was really have this talk with you because what I hear before when I started Blaxit Global and having these conversations with people on the show and then on the channel and then now living here in Portugal is this universal feeling of being able to breathe for the first time, like take a deep breath, a
Mm-hmm.
sense of calm that they haven't had before. And so the best thing that I could describe was like this feeling of psychological safety.
Mm-hmm.
So before we get into like defining psychological safety, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm originally from California. So hello to all my West Coast people on the live right now. So I spent majority of my life in California, from Southern California, and then went to undergrad in Northern California. I lived in Oregon for about 2 or 3 years, and then following that is when I left the country. So that was maybe about 9 years ago now. And so lived in Spain for just under 2 years, lived in England for about 6 years, 5 or 6 years, and then I've been in Japan for just under 2 years.
Oh my goodness. So, what was the thing that I'm curious because I know you're very well educated? Was it education or feeling like there was something more outside of the States, or what was it that really spurred the first visit, first trip out?
The move abroad is what you're
Yes.
referencing. Um, I think so. It was a mix of two different things. So I studied abroad in undergrad, and that was my first experience outside of the country, outside of America. And then I feel like I was bit with the travel bug there. And so I studied abroad in at every level of education. What caused me to move is when I was in graduate school at USC. I did a study abroad program in Europe, and then my school had a what do you call it? A almost like a bridge program where they would send some of their students to live in England, and so that's what started getting me on the idea of using the degree that I had abroad. I didn't take advantage of that, but while I was living in Oregon, um, we had two bilingual therapists there, and they were getting paid a little bit more, a lot of bit more than what I was paid. And so I went to my boss and I said, "Hey, I'm going to move to Spain. I'm going to learn Spanish, keep my job open, and then I'll be back in a year, and then you'll pay me what you're paying them." And so that's kind of like that's kind of what really got me abroad. But then once I got to Spain, I realized I just didn't want to come back to America.
Oh, so when you had that experience, and I guess it's a nice little segue into the topic for today,
Mhm.
um, was this the feeling that when you said, "Oh, I don't want to go back," would
Mhm.
you describe it as a feeling or one of the feelings as being a perception of psychological safety?
Yeah, I think that the reason I had decided not to move back to America in that short amount of time, because that was like within the 6 month window, is that I
Mhm.
realized that the value system um, was different abroad, at least in Spain, at least with the people who I was speaking with. And so when I was living in America, my value system was like hierarchy, moving up in the company, getting the corner office. It was like maintaining or attaining and maintaining wealth, which all of those things are nice. But when I was in Spain, I was just able to live. Like, one, the cost of living was
Mhm.
less, but then I was just also able to live. And so, when we're talking about psychological safety, what that allowed me to do was just focus on things that, like, outside of just having to work all the time because I wanted to, climb up the hierarchy. And so I was just able to, like, go to the park in the middle of the day for siestas and, like, spend time with people that I really enjoyed. And that shift from being this kind of like workhorse mentality to, like, actually enjoying the life that I'm setting up for is what really caused me to um, not want to move back. Move back to the States, because ideally, yes, I could take that same mentality and move to the States, but it's almost like they don't intertwine well, because the cost of
Mhm.
living in some parts of America is so much, and because the expectation is to be at work and to work, longer hours. It's hard to bring Spain, that mentality to America.
So true. Yeah, for sure. So for people who are watching this live or watching the replay, how would you, or have never heard the term psychological safety? This could be the first time that they're hearing it and putting the word to the experience that they've been feeling or realizing that they're lacking. So for
Yeah.
you, how would you define psychological safety?
Um, I think I would just define it as like psychological peace and finding a way to kind of what is the word I'm looking for? Like to fortify like whether it is your values, your peace, your mental health, like your overall well-being. um and for different people that can look very different. And so it could be like if somebody's value system is family first, and then it's their own self-care, and then it is I don't know, like finding time to relax, or spirituality, or like whatever the case is. It is being very intentional about these things that build up your psychological health, and
Yeah.
making sure that you are fortifying that you're protecting it, and that you're practicing those things.
Hmm. I love the definition. And I think I'm going to take a leap and say we would agree here is it being psychological safety is something that for many Black Americans is something that is has not been a luxury that hasn't been afforded to us.
Right,
We might
right.
engage in different practices, like you said, making candles, buying things, doing
Right.
yoga, doing all the things, but yet when we go out of that door, there is an extra layer of armor that we carry in preparation for what we know will be some level of
Right,
microaggression that we have to
right,
deal
right.
with,
Yeah.
or on a macro level, some level of discrimination, whether it's in housing, employment, despite all of the laws, all of the things,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
We, as those who inhabit these bodies, know that anti Blackness is real.
Hmm.
And I think what compounds that feeling of not having psychological safety is that we get inundated with messages either from the media or from, I don't know, minions, right? That will reinforce these issues that really are gaslighting. Like, oh, you thought that was this? Like, oh, I mean, are you sure? And so you're perpetually second guessing and
Hmm.
replaying almost
Hmm.
every interaction to the nth degree, which in
Yes.
my mind uses up so much mental space
Yeah.
that just you get in this, or at least I'm talking about myself, this feeling of anxiety and depression and just overwhelm.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely would agree, especially with, what you're talking about in terms of that gaslighting, and whether it is in the workspace, whether it is kind of like just the day-to-day environment.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm not sure, are you familiar with where the term gaslight came from?
The
Gaslight.
movie,
Yes. Yes.
yes.
And so even with that, like the person who was like turning down the gaslight, it caused so much inner turmoil in that, in the women who like the husband was doing that to. It caused so
Mhm.
much inner turmoil. And I think that is when we talk about psychological health and psychological safety, it's like we can't even focus on the things that we really enjoy, because it is a lot of that
Mhm.
like replaying in our mind. It's a lot of the questioning. It's a lot of, there's just no space for psychological rest. And so we're always,
Mm.
always on guard, and that can be challenging and exhausting.
Yeah, because we talk about rest, and thankfully, we have like I was a speaker at Exodus Summit this past weekend, and we had Octavia Rahim do a
Mhm.
rest exercise, and we have like the NAP ministry, and a lot of talk about ease. And in that discussion is like seeking freedom, and whether that's freedom from your job for those of us who want to move abroad,
Mhm.
leaving your country of origin and finding a place in this floating rock to call
Mhm.
home. but there's this ease that you feel and that you can carve out, like I said, for more mental space. But I think many of us are now realizing like this energy that we've expended on, you know, on just day-to-day stuff has taken such a mental toll.
Yeah.
But then it's like, oh, and I'm always inspired when I have these conversations with people because they'll talk about ideas they've been able to birth, you know, abroad and all of these other things. Because now, to your point, it's like you have this ability to like, I don't know, I'm thinking like a butterfly that's coming out of a cocoon. You have this new environment and condition that allows you to flourish because you have that feeling of, okay, you know what, nobody's going to come over and clip my wings, you know, mid expansion. And when I'm in the States, like I said, I'm talking about my environment, it was always this like, what's it? There's a Icarus, right? You can fly so high, but then, you
Yep.
know, the sun burns you. And now you have this ability to be, or I have this ability to expand and fully like let my wings come out.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I agree.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the comments. Yeah, so locating cozy. Hey, one of our channel members. Hey, hey, hey. Definitely understand. It's a mindset shift for sure. And it's like, and Black women build wealth. That it's like once you live, it's hard to come back to
Yeah.
that old life.
Yes.
For sure, for sure, absolutely. So with the clients that you have, or whether it's your own experience or other people that you've met abroad, do you find that there's, I guess, how do I want to phrase it? Like I guess the pros and cons, really, right? The pros and cons to moving abroad, because I don't want to paint this picture of, hey, this is the problem and moving abroad is the solution, right? Or that you should only concern yourself with psychological safety pre-move, because for some people, the ability to be in a safe environment allows them to then finally release and
Right.
unload and offload a lot of
Right.
things. So, what are some of the things, either watch outs or tips that you would have for anyone?
Yeah. Well, I think the one of the biggest ones is going along with that sentiment of like wherever you go, there you are. And so
Mm,
I don't want to misconstrue psychological safety like um while there are some benefits to leaving one country and moving to another space, I don't want to people to misconstrue that as like, okay, I just need to leave.
mhm,
Because if there are things that you need to address, and that can be avoidance essentially. And so you might think that a change of scenery or a change of country, or can is the fix. But if the problem is avoidance, then you're just going to encounter that in the next place, and then avoid some of those things as well. And so I do have some clients where that has been the case, where they thought like, okay, I just need to move, and then like that will get rid of that problem, and it just kind of like relocates the problem. So I say that to say. It is important to kind of really do a full assessment on like what is the reason I want to live abroad? What am I searching for? And is that peace, is that whatever I'm searching for, like, is it attainable here? And if so, how can I restructure my life in order for it to be attainable here? Because a move might not be the answer. And so I think that that would be one kind of like watch out. And then when you talk about like tools and tips, essentially, um, for people who are already in mental health care or already engaged in mental health care, I think that it's important, especially with big transitions, to maintain that as much as they can. And so even if it's like on the like front loading their move with like, okay, let me have more therapy sessions so I can talk through this with my therapist. I think that that is important. Can you hear that squeaking?
I just
Or
heard it.
go fix that really fast. It's going to keep doing that. Give me 1 second.
Okay, no worries. I'll wait for Dr. Londi to come out. And like I said, y'all, you have any questions, feel free to pop them in, and she's back.
And so what I was going to say with that is like sometimes front loading that move couldn't be helpful, just to give you like, you know, that preparation, preparation period, or seeing if that therapist or if a therapist is available like once you're overseas, because it's really easy to get like, you're going to be very excited because it's, you know, the newness of, you know, a move. But just like with anything else, it's transition, and it comes with like some frustrations and some highs and some lows and some things that you might not have thought about. And so if we are rushing to this like psychological safety, like, oh, I'm moving because of the climate of America right now for Black people, you know, all that kind of stuff, it can be so easy for us to think that this is the fix, and then we're not thinking about some of the other things that we'll encounter that can also impact our psychological safety. So we don't want to trade one issue for another. We want to kind of be mindful about them all.
For sure. Because I always say on the show and on this platform is be clear about your why.
Yes.
And so this way, to your point, you're not running from something,
Right.
you're running towards. So improved quality of life, and however you define that. And it takes time for you to define it, because I talk about it all the time of living life by design and not by default. So many of us are living these lives that, you know, you wake up one day and you're just like, how did I get here? And then, you know, then it's this kind of unraveling to try to figure out, okay, what is it that I want to do? But the clearer that you can be in probing and being honest with yourself about, you know, what the challenges are, what do you think you want to be in the world, or what do you want to do, and how do you envision the time that you have here? I think that sets you up better than, oh my gosh, I just got to get out. You know, yeah, there might be a sense of urgency for whatever reason, but to your point, I love how you focused on, you know, being clear on that, and then recognizing that you need and can benefit from the support of a mental health professional.
Yeah. And I'd like to highlight that one because I see this like quite frequently, where people will say, like, because they think the move is the fix, so then they will disengage with services. And then they don't realize like how much of a benefit those services might have been. And so it's almost equivalent to like if a doctor prescribes some type of medication for those, you know, people who take any type of medication, and it's like, okay, this is to regulate your blood pressure, this is to regulate your anxiety, or like whatever the case is. Like once you stop taking it, then the ailment comes back. And so a lot of times people will say like, oh yeah, I'm going to move, with no clear transition from their provider, not realizing that those have been the like the life vest essentially that's assisting with you staying afloat. And so to just kind of like cut that off prematurely and trade it for something else that you're not sure will work, it can eventually be detrimental.
Yeah, and for sure, because there's stages in Blaxit Global. We have a move abroad course, and part of the course they talk about, you know, the stages of moving abroad. You know, you have that newness, which is I'm in that honeymoon phase, right? Where it's like everything is boa, right? But there, you know, eventually, you know, the patina will start to wear off. You start to get your routine, and you're off that high of everything being new, and then you're living your day to day. And for some, then it becomes like, oh, well, this is no different in this whole comparison thing. But then, like I think you had mentioned a little bit earlier, there are other feelings that can surface of either loneliness, depending on especially where you are in the world, missing people back home, or, you know, creature comforts or what have you. So with those aspects, or I'll keep with that thought. With those particular phases, what do you find as the best tips and resources to help people from that, which will be inevitable, right? There are going to be days where
Right,
you're going to feel lonely. There are going to be days where, you wanted to do something and it didn't work out the way you
right,
thought, or the move itself, you thought this
right.
was going to be the solution
Yes.
and you're still in the same situation.
Yeah, yeah. Um, it was something that you said earlier. Well, so the one thing that I say, like in general, is to give yourself grace, like just with
Mm,
the transition period, as it stands together. But some of the things that you can foreshadow, like exactly what you said, and excuse me, in terms of keeping up with family members, be intentional about those activities. So a lot of times people will say, like, okay, like, yeah, we'll chat when we chat. But if you're not already like setting those expectations and talking to, people about this is going to be the time difference, and I know this is your work schedule and this will be my work schedule. Do we want to commit to Saturday mornings being our time, or do we want to commit to whatever, like once a month or once weekly? And I think that when you kind of over communicate some of those things, it makes it clear for you and the other person, so that there are strategies that are already in place, and that can be helpful. Because for me, like now, I know that I call my mom every Sunday on her way home from church. Um, and so that's a time, because I know that she's in a car. But if I'm not telling her, like, hey mom, this is really important to me to have this, like, designated time with you, she might say, like, oh, I took somebody home after church, or I'm going to dinner, or like whatever the case is. But if she knows that that's important to me, she might say, she'll block her calendar for that, like, okay,
mm,
if I can't do it Sunday, like, Londi, when do you want to reschedule? Or she's telling her friends, like, oh, hey, I don't have time, during this period, because I normally talk to my daughter. So I think being
mm,
intentional about some of those practices, I think, are helpful. I think the other things, I tell my clients, like, we are experts on ourselves. So even though
mm,
my clients come to me to kind of like help them, a lot of it is me like asking them questions and getting to know things from their perspective, so that I can support them. And so I would write a list of some of those things that you think are going to be barriers, or are going to be difficult parts about the transition, and try to start problem solving them before you get to them, as opposed to like waiting for them or allowing them to catch you off guard.
So being proactive in and intentional in your
Right.
wellness journey.
Right. Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
So what role, obviously, if you're moving from one country to another, there's,
Yeah.
depending on where, cultural differences, sometimes language differences, etc. What role do you find that community plays
Hmm.
in either making or breaking that transition or easing that can transition?
Yeah, community is huge. And I would say on both sides, like the community that you're leaving and the community that you're headed to. Um, because uh, I think a lot of people who live abroad, who move abroad, and who live abroad would agree that there is this duality about them. There's like the person that they used to be, like from their home country, and then there's this new person that they're evolving into. So I think that it's really important to maintain the community, from your previous space, but then also um, to immerse in the culture, and to find a community where you are. And so whether the new community is like a community of expats, a community of locals, because it's really difficult if you're having a bad day and you need to reach out and talk to someone, and your previous community is in a completely different time zone. Like, that can make you feel even more lonely. But if you have at least like one or two close people,
Mhm.
where you are, then I think that can help balance the transition, and help ease the load there.
Yeah, so for those of you who are watching live, those of you who are watching the replay, get in the community, get in where you fit in, right? There
Right.
are a boatload of communities, whether it's Blaxit Global, get in where you fit in. A lot of people are in multiple groups for a variety of reasons, but having a community, having that support system increases your chance of having a softer landing. I'm not going to say success because you can define you move abroad in any way you see fit. But to have a softer landing where you get there and you don't have to spin your wheels and chase, or when you have a good day, right? There's somebody there to cheer you on, or when you're having a challenge, there's someone there to support you. Like
Mhm.
that is the thing that when I think about me, and I've wanted to move abroad since I was a little girl,
Mhm.
and for many years, for a variety of reasons that didn't materialize, and started thinking like, oh my gosh, this sucks, or I should have done this, and I should have, could have, would have, to now, especially last night, right, being in community with
Mhm.
everyone, and just seeing faces that 3 years ago I didn't know them, they didn't know me, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's like I couldn't have envisioned it being the way it is now. And I talked about it last night. It's like being able to have a vision, a vision, a plate, right? And you have food on your plate. It's like you can design the life that you want, but also leave space
Mhm.
because you don't know what is around the corner. And it
Yeah.
might be something that just makes the picture, that much perfect, or the
Yeah.
meal that much more tasty,
Right.
however you want to
Right.
do it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I definitely agree.
Yeah. Let's see, Maureen. So true. Having people in your new country who have your back is everything. That is so true. That is so true. Oh my
Yes.
goodness. Um, so one of the things that I did find that uh, is a challenge, and maybe it isn't, maybe it's just me not having the knowledge, is, when you're in your home country, whether it be the States or wherever, and sadly, even though we had World Mental Health Day the other day, I think most people would agree that most countries aren't doing enough to really put a greater emphasis on
Mhm.
mental health and having support
Mhm.
services. It's like they say it, but then they also do things that are the exact contrary to the
Right.
goal.
Right.
And so I find that when you're in the States, if you're able to seek services, it's more or less easy or familiar with the process. But when you
Mhm.
move abroad, I find that people run into barriers, either accessing the support
Yeah.
systems in their new country, or if they have a mental health professional that they've worked with in their home country, keeping that connection because of licenses, insurance, and things like
Right.
that. So,
Right.
what ways, or if there's websites or tools or resources that we can use in those scenarios?
Yeah. So I know the one that I really highlight a lot is what is it called? What is it called? What is it called? Are you talking about in terms of finding providers, or you're talking about like resources, like website for resources?
Either. Yeah. Finding a therapist if you don't have one, or having supportive resources, either to
Hmm.
keep that connection, or
Hmm.
um, something to help you in whatever stage of transition you're in.
Yeah. So what I was going to say, like, I like therapy for Black girls. Um,
Mm-hmm.
is one of my, like, to find Black providers, because it organizes it by state, and then it'll let you know if they are virtual, like if they offer virtual components as well. And so sometimes for the virtual component, sometimes you either do have to be physically present in that state that they're licensed in, as opposed to abroad. But there are some, like myself, who have the backing of being a coach as well. And so
Mm-hmm.
if you find a therapist who's also a coach, then that kind of breaks those barriers, because there's not a licensure that's attached to the coaching. So that can be helpful. And then Therapist Aid is one of the resource, like, websites that I use a lot for things like cognitive behavioral therapy, like worksheets on depression, anxiety, different things like that. So it has different tools that you can use to, to manage it. And then I've actually created a workbook as well. Um, and I don't, uh, you can get it through my website, but I've created a workbook that is for people either about to go abroad, or who are already abroad in how to maintain that psychological safety. So it is like, here are things that you need to think about. Here's a feelings chart, journaling feelings, different things like that as they go through different parts of the transition.
Oh, wow, that's wonderful. And if you want, you can put the link to that in our chat. You should see a thing, and then I can share it with the people on
Okay.
the live, and then I'll post it in the description. So you
Okay.
can go to Dr. Londi's website and you can get all of the information, do the worksheets, get the additional resources,
Mhm.
because we have to take ownership of our mental health,
Right.
because waiting out for someone to affirm
Mhm.
us when we know that it's not likely going to happen.
Mhm.
You just have to see it for what it is. It's like, you know what, when you see things on the news or someone says something untoward,
Mhm.
it's gaslighting, it's a microaggression, but you have to take ownership of your mental health. You have
Mhm.
to be, sadly, we have to be the ones that kind of, keep everything together. But also know that you don't have to do it alone.
Mhm.
Many of us, for whatever reason, might feel like, there's a lot of other feelings of shame, embarrassment, what have you. And because we don't paint the mental people that need mental health services, which we all do, right? We
Mhm.
all went through a traumatic event called the global pandemic.
Right.
Uh, and so we stigmatize people, unfortunately, in this country that seek mental health services. And even when I was younger and grew up at a time where even the discussion proactively around seeking therapy was frowned upon. It was
Mhm.
like, oh, we don't do that. Like, Black people don't do that. That's what white people do. Like, what?
Mhm.
And that compounds that feeling of, oh, maybe I shouldn't seek help. Maybe I shouldn't tell someone what's going on with me, which just continues to get you in this cycle of spinning your wheel, especially when you get those other, like I said, outside influences that have you second guessing your reality, or the trauma of seeing people like us, either being brutalized or other, aspects of discrimination and oppression. And so, what I think these discussions are really important is to identify what these issues are, both for the
Mhm.
individual and on the bigger system level,
Right. Mhm.
and give people the resources and support so that they don't feel alone and that they know that there are options available.
Right. Yes. Yes, I agree. Um, I love where how far mental health has come. Um,
Mhm.
like in this, I guess you can say, day and age, in this climate. And I think a lot of it is like with the push of social media, celebrities are normalizing it, a little bit more. And so I love how people are embracing that. Because just like you, when I was younger, my dad used to always say, like, family business is family business, and we don't, talk about that. And I think about like even going through death, like I at a younger age in high school, I lost my brother, and I remember like a therapist wanted to talk to me, and I was telling my dad like, "Oh, I'm going to go to this, support group, and go see this school psychologist." And my dad was like, "No, like we can process that at home." And that was just a climate, like whether it was like within the culture,
Yeah.
like with the Black community, just being more private, and it's not like I mean, it's not like my brother was in the wrong, for dying or anything like that. It's not like he was involved in, anything. But my dad was just like, you don't need to talk about that with strangers. Talk about that, with family. But then the whole family was grieving and nobody wanted to talk about it. And so,
Yeah.
it's this very interesting dynamic. And then also when I told my dad I was going to be a psychologist, he was like, I wouldn't, and there was that stigma along with being a psychologist as well. And so, it is a lot more normalized in this, in this day and age, and I hope that it, continues to
Mhm.
go down that route, um, because I see a lot of benefit from it, and that's me being on both sides of the couch. That's me being the
Mhm.
psychologist, and then also sometimes being the client as well.
Yeah, and I'm sorry about your brother and that whole situation of trauma.
Hmm.
And I think for your dad's generation, my mom's generation,
Hmm.
uh, that whole cultural, belief system about what goes on in this house stays in this house,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, was perpetuated. But I found, at least with my mom as of late, and having these challenging conversations and starting to unpack, trauma. We talk about intergenerational trauma. Is
Hmm.
that now there's this, I don't know if it would be a full level of awareness, but of like, oh wow, you know what? I probably should have gotten into therapy, or probably should
Yeah.
have gotten into therapy. There's this more to your point, because times have changed
Yeah.
and normalization, that now she's able to, and I don't know if that's true for your dad as well, but to see like, oh no, there is a benefit in talking to someone and processing things, because for so many, we're just continuing to carry things that haven't been processed.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I definitely agree.
So, how do you find that, when, I guess, maybe staying on this thread of trauma and not processing things, is for someone who might be watching this and wondering, does this apply to me or someone I know? How do I get
Hmm.
them help?
Hmm.
Um, how do you, I know it's hard to paint a broad brush, but what are some of the ways in which unprocessed trauma shows up in people?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, there's so many ways, but I would say the main one is like normalized behavior. And
Mm,
so whether that behavior is what you perpetuate or whether that behavior is then what you tolerate. So if we're talking about, let's say, the concept of love, and if someone thinks that the concept of love is hitting, spanking, yelling, like any of that, there can be, so if someone doesn't recognize it as trauma, they might perpetuate it onto others that they care about because this is their idea of love, or
mm,
in a relationship they will allow that to happen to them because, like, obviously this person wouldn't treat me this way if they didn't love me. So it can be perpetuated in that way. The others is that it can create like a barrier or a wall. And so like it can cause someone to be hardened. So if you are exposed to, let's say, whether it's like a high level of death, or if you're exposed to violence, or whatever the traumatic thing is, a lot of times you will utilize avoidance. And so you'll say like, okay, well, I don't trust this situation, or I'm going to avoid this situation because the last time I was in this situation it was so impactful to me that this happened. I don't want that to happen again. But if you're not tying those two things together, what you might think is like, I just don't like this thing. A perfect example, actually. I think it was 1993 or 1994, one of the two. In California, we had this really big earthquake, the Northridge earthquake. And so I remember I was sleeping by a window. And so the window was like rattling. And I remember as a kid thinking that somebody was trying to break in and like basically trying to kidnap me. And my sister, we shared a room. My older sister slept closer to the door. Um, and she just got up and she ran out and she went to my parents' room. So I just remember being startled awake. My sister's not
mm,
there. And then thinking that, somebody was trying to break in. I forgot about that incident. But for years, up until my late 20s, I didn't sleep by windows. And so I would, like, if I checked into a hotel, if I was going to someone's house, I would always have that preference, like, oh, I just don't like to sleep by windows. And so it wasn't until I was in a psychology class and the professor used me as an example. I don't even know how that came up, but I had said that, like, oh, I don't like to sleep by windows. And he was like, well, let's explore that. Why not? And I said, well, I just feel like I'm too close to the outside. Like I feel like somebody can, like, reach in and, get me. And he was like, well, where do you think that perpetuated? And so I held on to the idea of, like, everything about that. I just said like, oh, I feel like I can get kidnapped. I feel like someone will break in. not realizing that that was rooted in that trauma. So without me kind of processing that and realizing it's an earthquake, you're on the second floor, somebody, wasn't coming in. I took the message that I learned from the trauma and just applied it forward as opposed
Mm,
to, like processing the full thing. And so I think that that can happen across the board.
for sure. And I've been reading, on and off about early childhood trauma and things like that. And there was an interview I did recently with Azalea Borshade, Picky Girl Travels the World, days after I moved here. It was very raw, candid interview. And I talked a little bit about some early childhood trauma. And one of the things that I realized was, in reflection, I was, for a long time of my life, operating at a high level of anxiety that I carried on, but I didn't recognize that it was anxiety because when it occurred, I didn't even have the word for that. When you're a little kid, and like you said in that example, and it helped me think about that in that instance. It's like when you're young and these things happen, you're experiencing it physically, psychologically. You don't have the language yet
Right.
for it. You just have a feeling, and then
Exactly.
you deal with it or not, right? But then
Right.
as you become older and you have more, exposure to different terminology, and that just helps you understand it. So for some people, I think from what I'm hearing from you is that it might be like a replaying, and you're not even conscious of the underlying reasons because perhaps it happened at such an early formative
Right.
stage where you
Yeah.
didn't have the ability to connect the incident or incidents with
Uh-huh.
what the actual thing was: depression, anxiety, a traumatic event.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I think for so many people, as you're watching this, hopefully this conversation is helping you to connect the dots and also leading you down a path to seek mental health services, because that is going to allow you, whether you move abroad or not, right? Or wherever stage you are in your journey, pre-move, post-move, this is going to help you to, like Dr. Londi said at the beginning, fortify yourself. And you can have an enriched experience. Like I said, whether you move abroad or not, just being able to allow yourself to flourish. And I know it might be challenging for people who are stateside and are dealing with, a confluence of issues. But the more that you can pay attention to these things, I think the better off you'll be.
Yes, I definitely agree.
I think when I go to the comments, Black women build wealth. I recently heard someone say that you can't heal in the same place you've been hurt. It seems to fuel motivation to move abroad. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if we're talking about um, if the hurt is like the climate of America, essentially. So if we're talking about being Black in America, if we're talking about um, like police brutality, and different things like that, then yes, I would agree with that. Because if the hurt is still going on, like if the behavior is still going on, then
Mhm.
it's really difficult to be in that same environment and expect anything different.
Mhm.
But if we are talking about if there is a changed behavior. So if what I'm saying is um, hurt came from, say, for example, parent abandonment, and that you're living in America, one of your parents abandoned you when you were younger. There is a way to kind of like work through that, because that's not associated with the location, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
But if the hurt that we're talking about is associated with a geographic location, and that behavior hasn't fixed itself or hasn't changed, then yeah, we're just still in the same contaminated environment.
Oh yeah, and it can also be in the workplace. Can be
Yeah,
overworked, right?
yeah,
Micromanaged. Uh,
yeah. we were talking.
underappreciated.
Exactly. Or like what we were talking about earlier, like if it's the microaggressions,
Mm,
and that's coming from a boss, a coworker, or like whatever the case is, and you go to therapy and you work through what you needed to work through on how that impacted you, but that boss is still doing the same thing, the coworker is still doing the same thing, and the hierarchy of the business is the same, then you're still going to be impacted. But it's very different if you go and you get healed and then you bring that information to the employer and say like, yeah, I learned that this is how this is impacting me, and they're saying like, oh, I didn't mean to, or like, yeah, I do recognize it as a microaggression as well, and then
mm,
they have changed behaviors, then that is like one such environment where you could potentially stay in that environment, um, if the behavior has changed.
And I find like the workplace, I've had my unfortunately fair share of shenanigans.
Yeah.
But I think that one is, I wouldn't say most disruptive, but it has the most impact because that's one of the places where you spend the most time outside of
Yeah.
your house, right?
Right.
One. And two, it's directly tied to your livelihood, which includes all of the parts of you that is protective, that connection to family. Well, if I don't have the money from my job, I can't support my family or myself and all of those things. And so when I hear, at the time I didn't know that, but now having some more wisdom underneath me. But when you hear like crap from employers, like, oh, we're family and blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, don't fall for the okie doke because
Right.
they will get rid of you in a hot minute and they don't
Right.
care about your
Exactly.
bills, your kids that you have to provide for, a sick parent, your mental health and your physical health, because we all know in America that your job and your health insurance are tied, right? And
Mhm.
so I think it can be very disruptive to people who are experiencing the negatives of or inability to have psychological safety in the workplace because they're like, well, if this person does this, you're already thinking, oh, this might happen, and then I'm going to lose everything. And so
Yeah.
sometimes I tell people it's just like whether it's like working a side hustle or getting out and
Mhm.
starting new, sometimes going from one job to the next is you're just trying to figure who's the best of the worst.
Mhm. Mhm. Right. Right. And I always like it's always been like, interesting to me how we leave our employment and we give anywhere between 2 weeks and 30 days notice.
Hmm.
But if they fire us or they terminate us, it's immediate, same day, no,
Yeah.
like no notice or forewarning. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. And especially when you're thinking about caring for yourself, caring for your family, and what you were saying, like the finances being associated with that, all of your benefits, your health benefits, and all of that. Sometimes we do stay in those toxic environments longer than what we desire, because the benefits of it are needed.
Yeah, and also feeling like we've heard things where we're talking about things from our families is oh, that good job and those good benefits or the good salary, and so you're hearing these things or you get praise for your job title and all these other things, but when you're experiencing these microaggressions and
Mhm.
being overlooked for a promotion or being micromanaged or having the microaggressions, all of those things, it's like it doesn't feel so damn great. Or
Right.
what's going on as of late is, this whole push, of course, with the pandemic, this push towards, remote work, obviously. And then now with people starting to realize, oh, I have more freedom of time. I
Mhm.
don't have to stay and commute. I have
Mhm.
freedom, location freedom, right? I can work from this
Yeah.
state or this country to now
Mhm.
there's this huge concerted pushback just to force everybody back in the office. And then it's like, oh, if you don't want to come, then it's like, we're going to cut you off.
Yeah. Mhm.
And that again gets back at the whole discussion around psychological safety and taking ownership. It's like the more you can do to start to think outside the box, to, as those of you who probably heard my talk at Exodus Summit, open the aperture, think outside the box. What are the ways in which I can supplement my income? What are the ways that I can try and safeguard, if there is an issue with my job? Maybe I need to start looking at remote jobs that let me work from anywhere and being proactive. Then it's not this feeling of hopelessness and helplessness when you're reactive. And sometimes, depending on you said it earlier about how you react to like traumatic events, you might be one that closes down and put sports blinders, and it's just like is it ostrich? I think it is. Like you just get frozen. Sometimes we kind of freeze. We have a freeze response.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, well, I don't know what to do. But to
Yeah.
the extent that you can start to be proactive, then you're like, okay, you know what? I have dominion. I have agency. Yeah, they did that, but that's no big deal. Rather than feeling like, oh my gosh, like Chicken Little, the sky is falling.
Yeah. Yeah. No, everything that you said, I absolutely agree with. And it gives you that level of empowerment when you do exercise that agency. And a lot of times, like with the like traumatic response, because it was so normalized for us, like because it's just like, something that you went through, a lot of times we don't recognize that it was wrong or that it was traumatic or, like, and so it can be liberating, even that first step of like, okay, well, first of all, let's talk about how it shouldn't have happened or what should have happened instead, and then now let me take ownership over that, and that whole experience can be empowering.
Our Black Utopia said finds it easier to turn off the negative tape recorders outside of the US, which for me tends to trigger negative self-talk. Yeah, completely. I can attest to that for myself. I'm like I'm an introvert. So in my house all the time, ruminating and time warping, thinking of the future, thinking of the past, never being in the present. And now that I'm here, the tape recorders are, that tape recorder is broken, and I'm not living in the future or the past. I think I'm the most focused in the present. But I now realize that part of who I
Right.
am, and my personality was directly attributed to the environment in which I lived in.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, the environment and then like what's being fed into your like your psyche, your spirit, like, so being able to protect that piece, exactly like what that, person just commented on. Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Yeah, because in the States, we're inundated with these messages of consumerism
Yeah.
and rugged individualism, right? You're supposed to be able to pick yourself up by your bootstraps, but we, as the African diaspora, we're a collective. And so what I find is like who we are as a people is constantly in conflict with what's going on in the messages around America. Like to your point earlier, like, climbing and achieving these status milestones and benchmarks, and your value system with who you are isn't in alignment with the messages that you get about, beauty standards, about education, about, the American dream of home ownership, whatever that is. And, I feel, and I know a lot of people feel this way now, is like the new American dream is to leave.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah,
That is
because
true.
so many of us, we haven't even felt the privilege and the cachet that comes with being American. Because, everybody has this belief
Yeah.
of, oh, you're in America. And it's like,
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Um, and the American dream is not the same for all Americans. And, and a lot of that has to do with access, like with having access into having like the equal opportunities that others have.
Mhm.
And so it's like, yeah, if I can do better elsewhere, then I'm going to do that, you know?
Yeah. And even the passport privilege, like, that blue passport has still some level of cachet in the world. And even just having people interact with me, and I talk about it on the podcast, is I feel more recognized as an American for the good parts when I'm outside of the US. But
Hmm.
when I'm in the US, I don't feel that. I feel like I'm, second, third,
Right,
whatever, lower
right,
class,
right. Yeah.
despite my education and income
Hmm.
being, when you think about middle class, upper class, middle class, those
Hmm.
ranking systems, it would be, towards the top, but
Hmm.
the feeling, the perception is that I'm othered,
Hmm.
and all of the messages that we talked about, and then and also this duality. It's like, you love you being America,
Yeah.
love the aspects of Black culture, our music, our features when it's on someone else's
Right.
body and skin. But when we inhabit the bodies in which we do, and the excellence that we achieve, being, highest educated,
Hmm.
but often the least paid,
Hmm.
um, or this conversation around, do we pay reparations? Well, it was that long ago, and oh, but I can't do the math. Okay, we'll make it real easy for you, America. If slavery is too hard for you to calculate, how about y'all pay for the shit y'all still doing?
Right. Right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I say this, and I've had this conversation. I know some of them are in the chat. We've had this conversation recently. And honestly, that's just where I feel, because how is it that, I've had these conversations on this platform, on the podcast, different outlets, and you and I are having this conversation with you being in Japan, me being in Portugal, all in different fields, different levels of education, different ages, right? Grew up in different parts of the country, the world. We all singing the same Negro spiritual.
Hmm. Hmm.
So for people that say, oh, we're now in this post-racial society and we need to, take this out of the books, is which that, nonsense that they're doing in Florida. And, we see voter suppression and all of these things. It's like, there is a lot of pressure on us
Hmm.
as Black Americans living in the United States.
Hmm.
And it feels like a vice.
Hmm.
And it's hard, and I want this really to hit home, is like, it's hard to expand when you have that much pressure. And again, we're not proposing that moving abroad is the cure all to all of those things. But
Hmm.
what I am challenging people to do is to think outside the box, to open the aperture, and to take the proactive steps to at least explore, either
Hmm.
explore by inspiration from these conversations and others, or explore by actually getting your passport, getting on a plane ticket, and challenging not only yourself, but also how you perceive yourself in the world, but also the messages that you've received and the conditioning that you've had over your lifetime that may allow you to expand in a way that you couldn't have before.
Hmm. Yeah. 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 I agree.
Cool. KB said rest and financial independence are another important components. In America, we're so busy that it can be difficult to process all of the variables at play. Absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, but is there anything before we wrap that we should tackle about this topic that we haven't covered?
Um, No, like I really like the piece that she just mentioned, the rest and the financial independence. But even when I think about rest and I think about when I was in Spain, this is when I realized that my value system was changing and that different people value, different things. Um,
Mm-hmm.
is that I was talking to, so I stayed with the host family, and so I was talking to the host father, and we were talking. The question I asked him what was his dream car, and he said that his dream car was anything that could comfortably fit all of his. He has two children, a partner and two children, so anything that could comfortably fit the family. Because he said, like I just like to do things as a family, and I just like to in Spain for the summer though, like people will go on vacation for like 3 months. So they'll leave Madrid and go down to the southern region where the water is, like the coast. Um, and so he was talking about that. And so, and then like in Spain, they have the siestas in the middle of the day. They work longer hours and like into the evening with the idea of family time is in the middle of the day. So like parents will go and pick up their children from school, have 3-hour lunch times with them so that they come home, they do their homework, and they don't have to worry about like waiting up for their parents to, get off work or, different things like that. And
Mm-hmm.
so I remember him telling me, because he used to live in America, and he was like, with America, like it was just work. Like my boss just wanted me to work all the time. And he was like, there was just no time for my family or no time for rest or no time for, like literally anything. And what he was saying, he was like, I believe it's because like it is a culture to just kind of move up. And so in order to move up, you have to prove that you can perform. And so you're, at work all the time. And so going back to that comment, I think that for me, part of the reason, so part of psychological safety for me is the ability to have that balance. I do really enjoy what I do. I really enjoy helping people. I enjoy being a psychologist, but that is still taking on a lot and talking a lot and helping people navigate, their own lives. And so for that balance, for my own psychological safety, like having the rest, being able to vacation, being able to have, that downtime, I think that that's a huge, component of it. And us being, me being an American, that isn't necessarily, hasn't always been, advertised as an element of success or as an element of like just psychological well-being. It's just to be able to rest in that way.
Yeah, because from the time we were extricated from our homelands and came to the US, it was all about productivity, right?
Right,
Measuring everything, the black body, the black output, and
right,
even still today.
right.
And to your point, it's like the things that hold us together. And I say to people all the time, nobody's gonna put your job title on your tombstone, how much you made, how big your
Right.
house was, how many square feet, right? It's gonna be your name, the date you came, the date you left, and that line in between, right?
Mhm,
So what do you do with that line in between? And then
mhm.
there might be a few words from the people that you loved and who loved you the most, father, sister, brother, friend, however the title is. But in the States, even those life's milestones and things that are the glue that holds you together, right? A
Mhm.
marriage, the birth of a child, and then, or other things that are unfortunate in life, right? Death, divorce, what have you. There are things in just day-to-day life that you don't even get the ability to experience. I know that there have been coworkers that have fallen ill or have had quiet illnesses that they've dealt with because they're like, oh, if this person knows at my job, I might not get that promotion, but I need this money to pay
Right.
for treatment or to put my kid through school, and I'm a single parent, or all of these things. And so it's counter to what you're saying about your experiences in other countries where there's this more of a safety net so that that if I do this, you know, the dominoes, all the dominoes don't topple.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and in the States, it's not that. It's like You're responsible for everything. And I see that happening now, even though I have the benefit of having some distance. And maybe that's one of the things we'll close on is, this kind of discussion about, the retirement crisis and people not prepared for retirement, and this discussion around, we're going to consider extending, retirement age, pushing it, or pushing Social Security, or you should delay your benefits, or, these news stories of this person was 85 and they worked for, 65 years on the same job. And all of these messages, right, to make you think like, oh, I should be striving for that. And again, that's how you wind up living a life by default, because you're striving towards a goal that you didn't create. You're just going along and get along.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Thank you, Bailey, for facilitating this conversation. So many nuggets of wisdom. Thank you. Thank you. Well, if you want more of Dr. Londi, why don't you tell them how they can connect with you?
Sure. So I have a website, drlondi.com. And then also on social media, my handle is at Dr. Londi.
Awesome. And I'll even give y'all a little tidbit, because y'all have been like, Krishan, when's season 6 happening? It's coming back in January. And you'll hear more from Dr. Londi in season 6 of the Blaxit Global podcast. Dr. Londi, this has been, I know it's a big discussion, this topic.
Yeah.
And I loved your approach, your philosophy, and just making it clear and concise. I have been changed by this conversation. You've definitely given me some things to think about. I love the resources that you shared. And for those of you who are watching live as well as the replay, I really hope that this conversation has, really brought the conversation and elevated the issue of psychological safety, and brought it to the forefront. And hopefully you'll take advantage of either, connecting with Dr. Londi or getting in some other supportive resources that can help you in your journey. So as I close, definitely want to encourage y'all to tune in on Thursday. I'll be live again on Thursday at 5:30 p.m. And again, if you haven't gotten your ticket, get your ticket to the Move to Portugal Virtual Summit we're doing in partnership with our friends, Our Black Utopia. And in the meantime, we shall see you soon. Be safe and be well. Bye for now.
Bye. Thanks for having me.